Okay, so welcome to part 3 of building on my previous video, and as well as the second Substack article I've written on healing our wounds of validation, as well as what I call relational trauma or maybe connection trauma. And so I'm talking to anyone who sees themselves in this topic, but I'm also especially talking to a group that I call gifted empaths. So if you give me just a brief moment, I'll quickly make a side note on this. Gifted empaths are obviously we are empaths. We're highly empathic, which means we have above average somatic and emotional perception. And we're also on the giftedness spectrum in neurodiversity. So all of this means that we're extremely sensitive and perceptive on multidimensional levels. And being gifted, we're also predisposed to seek out higher levels of synthesis and integration. And if you want to hear more about this, definitely read what I've written so far on Medium or also on Substack, whichever platform you are on. And yeah, you can subscribe to both my mailing lists there for more on this. Okay, so back to our main topic, which is relational wounds and self-validation. So these go hand in hand. And if we experienced any type of core injury of validation from our primary caregivers in our developmental years, we are likely to have tried to address that through compensatory forms of connection. And so this could look like seeking to unconsciously to seeking to replace some original form of loss or neglect. And basically, it's a way of representing the original trauma so that you can repeat it and heal it, or subconsciously, you think you are solving it. And now, the problem with this is that keeping the source, doing this keeps the source of the solution outside of you. So effectively, it's keeping you in a form of dependence on someone or a situation that is outside of you and is not ultimately in your control. And yet, this is part of the tragic irony of this wound because we were supposed to receive this core validation externally from our caregivers in the primary developmental period. And we now know this fully extends to like our mid 20s, at least, like on a neurological level. So, and it's doubly ironic too, because for healthy, mature adult relationships, especially intimate partnerships, we don't want this issue of validation to be like influencing these or putting pressure on these in any way. Like it just won't work. But there's also another reason for anchoring our source of validation internally, intrinsically. And this is really huge. Like, this is about strengthening our sense of self against real or perceived or anticipated forms of criticism or judgment and rejection. And this is our particular wound, okay? It doesn't affect everyone equally, and it affects a lot of people. So like all those memes that we see about, like rejection is divine redirection, like that's true and beautiful, but that's still just an intellectual reframe. For some types of rejection, true rejection is a very deep trigger and it activates a physiological response. It is a trauma response. So there's a range of types, but like the worst ones, this is what's happening. And so I'm going to share a couple of intuitive images that I've received about this, about how to bring back this source of validation internally and to effectively self-validate. And so for the people that I'm talking to, if you are resonating with this so far, or if you think that you are a gifted empath, this is absolutely within like our top 3 core triggers. This is very fundamental. Okay, and so the first image I received is about the higher meaning of a trigger. So a true trigger isn't really something on the level of content. It's not like a specific topic that we're trying to avoid. If we have awareness and an ability to navigate our way around like the types of thoughts and feelings we would rather be having, we're already conscious. We're consciously doing this. An actual trigger in this perspective is an unconscious experience. It's more like a seizure. it has a physiological dimension, and it activates our emotional state and our ability for higher reasoning and perspective taking. So it does send us into a trauma response, but it's a very highly individualized, very specific response that is activating the very patterns of our core initial injury. And so it is very much like I see it as a psychic seizure. Once this psychic seizure has subsided somewhat, we can gain back more of our awareness, and then we can like start to work on like integrating the imbalances that this has shown us. Now, the specific image I got here is pretty cool. It's maybe it's not fully original, but it's kind of a shamanic reframing of the experience of this psychic seizure. And what it is that this trigger is kind of like a visitation from a lost or fragmented part of ourself. And it's kind of like there's a tidal wave that is like floating back this part of ourself onto the shores of our awareness. And so once we have it there, then we can slowly begin to like explore it and reintegrate it. And we learn eventually like that this didn't actually belong to anybody else, but it was always there for us. It's something that we have to bring back home. Now, this trigger, obviously triggers can involve anything, but in this context for our discussion, I just want to use the example of validation. So a core trigger here can absolutely be the reactivation of the networks involved in your original experience of the disruption or loss of validation by either your parent or your primary caregivers, or one of your first romantic relationships. And yeah, so this is ultimately at the root of many of our early core relationships, basically. And so if we look at this like so-called piece of self that was lost, to see like what are we talking about here with validation? What this is the totality or integrity of our self-image. It's the perception of ourselves, an embodied perception, as complete and whole and integrated. And this is always the case on a higher dimensional level, but our human time-bound experience might only receive parts of this image. It may be very slow. The download may be slow, or maybe the file gets corrupted because of early experiences of dysfunction. And so we have a shaky connection to our self-image in a very real, palpable, and physiological sense, because there's absolutely a physiological dimension to our schemas of self. Okay, and so, but what is cool, and this is kind of, I guess it's a third image that I've got while talking about this. This self-image is really like how we say we are going to copy or download in an image of an operating system but it's for our life, basically. And so to self-validate means we find a new way to make this clear connection to re-download this uncorrupted file, basically. And so here's the third image. It's three. Had a meta download. And so the third image I received about this is that to move our validation inward, to integrate it, we need to act on fear and to understand our fears as a bridge between our current self and our future or higher self that's calling us up to that timeline. And this feeling of fear, what it actually is, I think, is a perception of the energetic jump that's required of us. It's how we receive the portal to our higher timeline. It's like a storm system that we have to walk through, and then once we're inside it, the weather's great. We learn the storm is ultimately illusory, but it's just there as a signal. It's coded uniquely for us. And so someone said the other day, like, I'm usually good at remembering, but I forget who it was. Fear is kind of like your green light. So you have to discern with this, not all types of fear, but this type of fear that I'm talking about here, you've got to learn to see it as like there's this coded signal specifically coded for you that unlocks, this is your portal to your higher self, basically. And So this is what integrates self-validation, because it actually literally establishes the link between our current human time-bound experience and our higher self, which is really our infinite source of our empowerment and our higher forms of knowledge. And so as we establish and strengthen that connection, we continue to have a very direct line in to this, to every new update, so to speak, of this literal self-image, kind of as, again, a set of like operating instructions for this virtual GUI that is our 3D experience. So the lessons here: welcome your triggers, fully accept them, and see what they have washed up on the shore for you. It's some type of need that you need to meet for yourself, or it's a literal piece of yourself that you need to find a way to bring home and make part of yourself. So the other approach to integration, though, lies with what I just outlined with fear, acting on our own fears, in tandem with our fears, working with our fear as this kind of signpost to where we're supposed to go. And it's because this will open the connection to your higher self, your higher timeline, however you want to think about this. It will give you direct forms of validation and guidance, and you won't have to like wait for triggers. I mean, they will still be there maybe, but it won't be like, this won't be like the source of your knowledge and learning and progress in the same way. So I hope this gives you some new or added perspective or some motivation in this area. Let me know if there's anything I can clarify for you in the comments. But most importantly, I will try to keep bringing out these videos, and my larger goal here is really to bring more of a psycho-spiritual perspective onto neurocomplexity in general. But I am speaking to everyone for whom, like, if this resonates with you, my approach is such that I'm not talking within like given like psychiatric or psychological silos. I'm working from a phenomenal level, which applies to direct experience. So if you recognize yourself in this language, this applies to you. Okay? And so, but most importantly, if you want to help this project, the thing that you can do, the best thing that will help the most right now is if you could subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet, because that will really keep this a viable project going forward. So thanks so much for watching. And if you'd like to join my study group, you can do this through Medium or Substack. It's going to go to my same mailing list. And I also have a link here in the About on YouTube, so you can use that as well to join. So I hope to see you, and I'll be back again. All right, thanks.